Good morning and welcome to 3 Minutes of Truth. I want to read to you today a scripture that you've probably heard a lot, and at this current time that we're living in, it is also being quoted very often. But it says in Hebrews 10 verse 25, "This is not the time to pull away and neglect meeting together, as some have formed the habit of doing, because we need each other. In fact, we should come together even more frequently, eager to encourage and urge each other onward as we anticipate that day that is dawning." That's the Passion Translation, in case you were wondering. So I know you're probably thinking like, hey Nathan, have you looked outside lately? Do you realize what's going on? It's still very difficult for a lot of churches to meet, or churches having to meet with restricted numbers or stuff like that. So why are you coming here, Nathan, reading this scripture to us, telling us not to neglect meeting? But I just want to encourage you to change your perspective on what this verse is actually speaking about. So I think we have restricted the kind of meeting that they're talking about in Hebrews 10 to a church service on a Sunday morning or Sunday evening, or just church services in general. But if you look at the church that this was actually written to, the first century church, they weren't meeting once a week in a church building in one big service. They were having small meetings from house to house. They were having meetings all throughout the week. They're having different groups meeting whenever they could, just doing things together. And the Bible also tells us in Matthew 18 verse 20 that where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. So we need to begin to change our perspective to realize this kind of meeting that they're talking about in Hebrews 10 is not just a service on a Sunday. Anywhere where 2 believers or more are gathered in God's name, His presence, His authority, and His power are there with them. This is such an amazing truth, because what it means is you don't need to have a big service. You don't need a band to come and play 3 songs. You don't need the pastor to be there for you to be able to meet like how they're speaking about in Hebrews 10. All you actually need is one other believer. If you can find just one other believer, it can be your spouse. You can do this with your spouse, with your children, with your family, with just 3 or 4 friends. If you can find just 1 or 2 other believers, you can meet with them, and the power, the presence, the authority of God is there with you in that meeting. So I want to encourage you to begin to set up these kind of meetings in your life. Don't neglect to do this. Begin to meet. It can be with just your spouse to do a Bible study. It can be with a life group. It can be a group of friends going and meeting at a restaurant to encourage one another and speak about things that are going on in your life. It can be a prayer group. All of these kinds of meetings are the kind of meetings that they're talking about in Hebrews 10. It's not about the Sunday morning service. It's about a group of believers coming together to encourage each other, to build each other up, and to, as they say, urge each other on, urge each other towards fulfilling the purposes of God for their lives, urge each other towards pursuing the promises that God has given them. That's what these kind of meetings are about. So I just want to say to all of you, don't wait for church to be able to open again with a big service. Begin to set up and have these meetings now. It can just be with your spouse, with your family, with friends. It can even be an online group. Go and join an online group. God's presence moves through online groups. God's presence is so much bigger, and it's not bound to a building. God can move in many places at once. So you can even join an online group, but join some sort of meeting, set up some sort of meeting hub so that you can continue to be encouraged and to encourage others. My name is Nathan, and this is 3 Minutes of Truth.